And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and I have sort of an interesting video today. You know, I was a little bit critical of the Phyrexia All Will Be One commanders. I thought they were getting a little bit lazy with the design there. And I don't think the issue is actually Wizards of the Coast, because I think they have lots of interesting designs, and maybe they're just not using them. And, you know, how much does the commander format come into play here? I don't know. I had a patron point out to me the mystery boosters. If you guys are familiar with those, they had these cards that are, I don't even know how to describe them, but they're sort of test cards, I guess, that they put into mystery boosters that you could get. I actually had a patron that cracked one open in a pack that they wanted me to do a deck tech for. That being Slivdrazi Monstrosity. This is one that a patron of mine cracked open in a pack, and I did a deck tech for them on my Patreon. A colorless white, blue, black, red, and a green. So a 5-color commander, legendary creature, Sliver Eldrazi. Eldrazi you control are slivers in addition to their other types. Slivers you control have Devoid and Annihilator 1. And you can pay 3, create a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Sliver creature token. It has sacrifices creature, add 1 colorless. So this is, you know, obviously not a legal commander in the format. You know, I built this deck for them. They can talk with their play group. Certainly, if they want to play on my Discord with it, they can do so. And this one I would say is not super original. It is a little, you know, it's just combining the two tribes of Eldrazi and Slivers. I think it's really busted. But there is a lot of other really neat commanders or commander ideas that they did with these mystery boosters that I think they could revisit these ideas. Maybe are they going to? I don't know. So let's take a look at some. Cod, Etlin, Shiss, Envoy, 2 and a blue, legendary creature, Homerid Warrior, 2/3. All lands are islands in addition to their other types. That on its own is pretty interesting because you know, you're turning all your opponent's lands into islands in addition to their other types. So obviously they still tap for the normal mana. This is going to be sort of like an Urborg or Yavimaya situation where now all lands are going to tap for blue mana, but they're also islands. So of course that you can build around, and the island walk thing you can really go after here with this, obviously. Also other Homerids, Camerids, Cephalids, Nautilids, and Merfolk you control get +1/+1. So obviously Merfolk being the big one there. Those other creature types are very old school and very, you know, it's kind of funny when you go after these way less popular creature types, especially the ones from back in the day. You know, there's a couple cards that create tokens, I believe, of these kinds. We haven't seen these in a long, long time. It's an interesting commander idea, right? This is the kind of stuff that I would like to see. More interesting, though, Lovak the Aberrant, 2 green and a blue. Legendary creature, mutant, 3/4. Protection from modified creatures, which is interesting because this card was printed a while ago, I believe, and they got the modified thing, right? So this is something that they have revisited, right? It says modified creatures have a power, toughness, or ability different than their printed version. Of course, they changed that. That's obviously what the original idea was for this, but they've changed it to enchanted, equipped, or have counters on it. But they did sort of revisit this later on. So I would imagine if they did print this commander, you would just have protection from modified creatures like we typically have the modified mechanic. That's pretty interesting, right? Your commander has protection from creatures that have equipment, auras, or counters on them. At the beginning of each player's end step, you may put a +1/+1 counter on target creature that player controls. Very interesting build around. It's sort of a bit of a huggy theme. Obviously, Generous Patron would be an incredible fit here. A lot of neat things you could do with this, right? You know, that does fit with the modified theme, obviously, because, you know, creatures with counters on them are modified. So this would be a really interesting commander. I'd love to see this one in the format. Let's take a look at Celestine Cavewitch, 3 and a black human warlock. This is not a legendary creature, but I think it would make a really interesting commander. It's a 2/3. When card name, so Celestine Cavewitch, enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 black insect creature tokens. So we're creating tokens. A lot you can do with that. They're also insects. Whenever Celestine Cavewitch attacks, you may sacrifice an insect. When you do, curse defending player. You curse defending player, which means you create a black Aura Curse enchantment token that's attached to that player. It has enchant player, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life. What an interesting card. Like, this would make for such an interesting commander. You're doing a little bit of an aristocrats theme here. You're doing insect tribal. Your commander creates insects, but obviously you want to be using your commander's ability more than just twice. So you're going to want other insects in the deck. You're cursing your opponents. You could do a little bit of a curse theme. You're making enchantments, right? Because you are creating enchantment tokens. So any of the constellation mechanic will work here really, really well. A lot of really interesting things you could do with this one. All right, let's move on to High Troller, 3 and a red Troll Shaman. Again, it's not a legendary creature, but I think would make a really interesting commander. It's a 4/1. All targeted spells and abilities cost 2 less and have their targets chosen randomly. Wow, what a funny commander this would be. It's a troll, which is really funny. The great flavor there. So obviously, this works for everybody, and I like global effects. This is something they've gotten away from in Magic, which they used to do all the time, which is you would have this really powerful global effect that affected everybody, and you would have to find a way to make it advantage you, right? Now it's just stuff your opponent's control, don't do this, or stuff your opponent's control. So it takes less of the deck building strategy out of it, and I like stuff like this. How would you build this deck? I don't even know. All targeted spells and abilities cost 2 less to cast, which means you could put lots of targeted stuff in here. But they also have their targets chosen at random, which means obviously you can end up inadvertently targeting your own stuff. This is the one place where Shroud is actually better than Hexproof, because now when you cast your lightning bolt or whatever, your stuff can't be targeted, so that it's not going to be included in the chosen at random. I mean, maybe it would be, but then it would fizzle because it can't target your stuff. So having Shroud here would be good. You could build this sort of like a Diachan deck a little bit, the way I built that deck, which is I have a lot of indestructible creatures, so it doesn't matter if my stuff gets chosen because it's indestructible anyway. You could do a little bit of that. It's a really interesting one. You could do the random theme here, right? You could, because everything's being chosen at random anyway, you could just put a whole bunch of cards that choose targets at random, and then it's not really going to be a downside for you, right? Really interesting. What a crazy commander this would make. All right, next up we have Inspirational Antelope. 1 and a green Antelope. That would definitely be the first Antelope commander. It's a 1/3, has Legacy. Before the game starts, choose a keyword or ability word and write it below. So I don't think you would actually have to write it. If they revisited this idea, you would just choose that. You just have to remember it, and obviously the players that you're playing with would know as well. Spells with that keyword ability you cast cost 1 less to cast. Very interesting commander. It would probably be better if this was more than just green. The fact that it's only mono green would be very limiting for you, but obviously you can just choose Death Touch and make a Death Touch tribal deck, or flying. That would be great in green. Trample would be a good one. You could do it very easily to do Trample tribal here. This would be a really neat commander. Just before the game starts, you choose a keyword ability, and then obviously that's the ability that you've already built your deck around ahead of time. So really neat idea. Next up, Visitor from Planet Q. And of course, you can't take the name so seriously, or obviously the art so seriously here, because they obviously just threw a name on here that didn't really, they were kind of joking around here a little bit. But again, if you look at these as actually a neat commander idea, I think they would make neat commanders. So this one's a 1 and a blue instant creature, and it's an alien. So I imagine it is, the fact that it's an instant creature, obviously we've never seen that before, but because it's an instant, I imagine it just is a creature that you can cast at instant speed. So it essentially has flash. I think that's how that works. It's an 0/4. All creature cards you own with flash are instants in addition to those other types. I mean, just think of the possibilities there. I don't even know. I mean, I guess what you could do is you could do an instant and sorcery wouldn't work, but just instant tribal theme here, and you wouldn't have to use instants. You could just use your creatures, because your creatures, all creature cards you own, obviously that means the stuff in your hand, the stuff that you're casting, right? Everything, as I say in my rules videos, all your creatures would be instants until they hit the battlefield, right? Because once they hit the battlefield, they're no longer a card, right? They are now officially a creature. So you would cast your creature in your hand. It's an instant creature. On the stack, it is considered an instant spell and a creature spell. So anything that says whenever you cast an instant spell would work here. Once it hits the battlefield, it is now officially a creature. It's no longer a creature card, so this will no longer apply, right? But that's you want to build around the fact that you're casting all your creatures as instants. Obviously, they would have flash as well, right? I mean, it says they have flash. Whenever you cast another spell with 2 or more card types, you may draw a card, then discard a card. So now every time, again, you're casting all those creatures, and they are instants and creatures, so you're getting to loot as well. So another fantastic thing that you can build around all the looting you're doing. There's obviously a ton you can do there. You can do the discard theme. You can do the I draw my second card each turn thing, which you can do even more because you're doing it on your opponent's turns as well. What a neat commander this would make. I mean, don't you think this would be a really, really interesting commander? Again, this one I might stay in blue, but you could also maybe make it Izzet or Azorius, maybe, but it could definitely stay blue and be perfectly fine. All right, next up we got Siege Elemental. 4 red, Elemental 6/6 with trample. Untapped creatures can't block. Tapped creatures can block. Again, very chaotic sort of commander that would really throw the game for a loop. And again, this is something that you have that universal effect, that global effect that is affecting everybody that you can now build around, right? So your untapped creatures, all untapped creatures can't block, and tapped creatures can block. So it's reversing everything. And I guess you would build this deck, like what you could do a couple of neat things here. First of all, it would throw the game in a bit of a loop, right? This would be the opposite of a goading deck, right? Because a goading deck is going to make your opponent's creatures attack. I mean, it might work here, but then your opponent's creatures will be tapped so they can block. Here, like an Angel's Trumpet might be good here because it gives all creatures vigilance. So now they won't tap to attack, which means they can't block because untapped creatures can't block. For you, if I was building this deck, I would say, okay, put a lot of creatures in the deck that enter the battlefield tapped, which there are a few, right? So you have a creature coming to play, it is tapped when it enters the battlefield. That probably would be a good thing. Obviously, you just want to be attacking a lot, creatures with tap abilities as well. Giving your creatures haste would be good because you can obviously attack right away. You want your creatures to be tapped, right? It kind of throws the game for a loop, so it makes for an interesting build around. All right, and lastly today, really interesting. The art on here is not a lot of effort put in on the art. I'll just say that, but obviously that would be changed if this was an actual card. Pure Steel Angel, 8 mana artifact creature angel. So obviously it's a colorless card, right? That again, having colorless artifact creatures that, again, if this was a legendary creature, I think would make a really interesting build around. It's a 4/4, flying and indestructible. So it's an 8 mana commander. That's a lot, but it is indestructible. So once you get it out, it's going to be hard to remove. When Pure Steel Angel enters the battlefield, exile all artifacts that aren't colorless. So how much is that going to affect, right? That's pretty good. It's obviously not going to hurt you. Again, this is why I think this is a really neat commander idea. It's not going to hurt you because you don't have any colored cards, right? It would be like an All Is Dust or something, right? Or maybe an Ugin. It doesn't hurt you at all because you're not going to have anything. How much is it going to hurt your opponents? Not a lot. Obviously, most artifacts are colorless, right? It's not going to hit the soul rings or the talismans or the signets or anything like that. There are a few, obviously, so that's not a huge build-aroundable ability there. What you could do is put Distorting Lens in the deck. That would work. There's a colorless option that turns stuff into a certain color, right? Does that work on your opponents, though? I think it does. So you turn your... Right, you're going to cast your commander. You just tap that Distorting Lens, turn your opponent's annoying artifact into whatever color. It's no longer colorless. It will get exiled. But that certainly is not an ability that you're going to be using a lot. It's a neat little added bonus. I like it. Whenever Pure Steel Angel deals combat damage to a player, you get an emblem with if you would lose the game. Instead, your life total becomes 20. Shuffle your graveyard into your library. You lose all poison counters and you lose this emblem. That's a very interesting ability. And I saw this and I thought this will be an interesting card to talk about, but is it actually good as a commander? Maybe we can dissect this here a little, right? So your commander costs 8. So you're not going to be doing this a lot. It enters the battlefield. You get that exile effect again, which is okay. It's not super great. You're going to have to attack with it. It has flying, so it does have evasion, but likely you're not going to be giving it a haste. I guess you could Lightning Greaves and maybe get in for damage right away. You get an emblem. So you're going to deal combat damage. You get an emblem if you would lose the game, right? So the emblem says if you would lose the game, instead your life total becomes 20. Now, of course, in Commander, that's why I thought this wasn't super good, because, of course, your life total becoming 20 doesn't mean your life total goes back to 40, right? So you don't even want to do this right away, really, right? Because, I mean, I guess you kind of do, because anything's better than losing the game. Shuffle your graveyard into your library, which can be good, can be bad a little bit, but it can also be good. You lose all poison counters. That's obviously even better by today's standards, obviously. I just made a video about the whole poison counter thing, so that, I guess, has gotten extra good. And you lose this emblem. So the wording here is interesting. So what's going to happen is, so you give yourself the emblem, and then if you would lose the game, you lose the emblem. So giving yourself more than one emblem doesn't do anything here, right? I guess you could give yourself multiple emblems, yeah. So you could give yourself an emblem and then give yourself another one. But they would all trigger at the same time, right? Because if you would lose the game, instead you're, oh boy, this is complicated. I don't know. I don't know. This is a tough one. Is this too good? Is this too good? Is it not that good? This is really a tough one to evaluate. The thing about the emblems, and I've said this before, is you can't get rid of them, right? There's nothing in the game that gets rid of emblems. So you could get, I think, into a situation here where you could very easily keep yourself from ever losing the game, right? So maybe it is too good. You do lose the emblem if you would lose the game. Does giving yourself more than one emblem actually accomplish anything? I don't know if it does. I mean, your commander's an artifact creature, but it is indestructible, so it's tough to get rid of. This is a tough one. You're in colorless. Let's keep that in mind, right? You are having to make a colorless deck, so it's going to be really tough for you to protect your commander. It's really going to be tough for you to do a lot of things. How good is this? I don't know. This is a really, really tough one. You know, there is some rules issues here I'm not exactly sure about, so maybe that plays into it as well. You guys let me know what you think below. And also below, there is a poll, and I will be making one of these decks. I thought, heck, why not? There's a lot of really interesting, I mean, they're not actual commanders. I've done this before. I've done the whole should be commanders thing. So if you guys, again, you'd have to talk to your play group, but talk with your play group. And if you want, you know, a couple of these are actual legendary creatures. But if you want me to make one of these decks, I will do so. Vote in the poll below, and whichever is the winner of the poll, I will actually go ahead and make one of these. I mean, someone probably has these cards, right? You can actually crack these open in booster packs. So if you guys have any of these cards, you might actually want me to make a deck with them. And if, you know, I make an interesting deck, you might actually talk with your play group and play it. So vote in the poll below which deck you want to see me make, and I will make it in my Building Janky Decks series. Let me know what all you think of all these really neat, interesting, I guess not really a lot of them are actual legendary creatures, but some really interesting creatures here that I think would make for really, really interesting build arounds. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.